UFC London is almost here. I'm going to give you my final picks. I'm going to give you a new betting strategy. We'll talk about some prop bets that I like, and we're also going to build some lineups later in the video, so make sure you watch until the end. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. If you haven't already, go back and watch the breakdown video from earlier in the week. That's going to act as a full card breakdown, but for this video, we're going to focus on strategy and what we need to do to be successful on this card. We started the week with 13 fights, and now we're down to 12. The Nathaniel Wood-Vince Morales fight has been canceled, which is tough because Wood looked like a solid play on DraftKings at his price, but we still built lineups after the fact, and there are a lot of interesting spots this week. And I think there are a lot of interesting spots because the matchmakers really didn't help out the home team at all. They gave them a lot of tough matchups, not a whole lot of layups on this card. Very, very close matchups throughout, and that means that there's going to be a lot of value below 8,000. And if you've been enjoying the videos at all, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel. It really helps me, and it helps what I'm able to bring to you. Now for our first value play, we have Alexander Volkov, one half of the main event. I really, really like him this week. I do think Tom Aspinall is the real deal, but it's hard not to like Volkov as the slight underdog in this spot. We see this all the time in MMA, where there's one fighter who's rising quickly, he's getting a lot of early finishes, and he takes one real big step up in competition. And when that happens, the early finish doesn't materialize, they're gassed out after the first 10 minutes, and then things start to go downhill. I can see that happening here. Volkov is historically difficult to finish, and we've seen him fight a hard 25 minutes multiple times in the UFC. Mind you, these are against the best fighters in the division. Tom Aspinall in his career has barely seen a second round. And like we talked about earlier in the week, Tom Aspinall did not look great against Andrei Arlovski. He definitely didn't look as good as the final result would suggest. He was able to hurt Arlovski early, and then he kind of rushed the finish, got tired, and started losing the last minute of the first round. In the start of the second round, the body language does not look great. He looks pretty tired, and you can see that in the first few exchanges. Ultimately, Arlovski throws a leg kick, and at the same time he's throwing the leg kick, Tom Aspinall shoots a double leg. He gets him to the fence, and he secures a rear naked choke, but it was not in the kind of position that a rear naked choke should be finished in. He doesn't really have his back fully, he doesn't really have the hooks in, it was just something that he was able to grab because Andrei Arlovski gave his back when he was standing back up. The point of me saying that is because if he doesn't get that choke over Andrei Arlovski, then the conversations that we have about Tom Aspinall today are probably a lot different than they are right now. And now he's scheduled to go 25 minutes against the best striker that he's ever faced. And if he wants to wrestle with Volkov, I think that's going to destroy his gas tank. We saw Volkov wrestle 5 hard rounds against Curtis Blades, and while he was giving up a lot of these takedowns, he was continuing to get back up and get the better of Blades on the feet. So give me the size, give me the experience, and give me the cardio of Alexander Volkov this week. If the fight does play out the way that we're describing now, where Aspinall is tired going into rounds 3, 4, 5, then Volkov's going to knock him out. He's not the kind of guy that you can stand across from and be fatigued and kind of coast your way to a win. Alexander Volkov does push a pace and he lands heavy. So if Aspinall's gas tank fails him, I think Alexander Volkov takes over, and that's what I expect in the main event this week. Next at 7,800, Luana Carolina is a better straight bet than I think she is a DraftKings play. She has the tools to beat Molly McCann this week, but a very, very limited ceiling when it comes to DraftKings scoring, and really not worth a spot in your roster. Again, I like to touch on her here because I do think that there's value here from a straight betting perspective. I don't know exactly what the line for Carolina by decision is, but that would be her most likely path to victory. But you have to remember, Molly McCann is home team. She's very active. She likes to mix it up by shooting for takedowns. So just being the more active fighter, showing the more diverse game plan, and being the home team, getting that big cheer every time she does anything, that can all really sway the judges' opinions, even if Luana Carolina might be winning these rounds. Proceed with caution if you're going to bet this as a straight bet. Earlier in the week, I had Luana Carolina by decision, but since then, I've changed my pick just because of the reasons that we just described. I think Molly McCann gets the decision win if the rounds are close at all. But I wanted to touch on Carolina because I was talking her up a little bit earlier in the week. Next at 7,700, Makwan Amirkhani. Earlier in the week, just like Carolina, I did pick Amirkhani to win. I think that he's probably the more talented fighter, but you really worry about his gas tank, and he really isn't someone that's good at fighting from behind. If Grundy gets some takedowns early, I can really see Amirkhani struggling late. He does have a good way of staying in the fight, but not really a way of winning the fight later. He does have that nice frontal choke package that we talked about earlier in the week, like the Darce and the Anaconda, and that might be good against somebody like Mike Grundy, who's going to be shooting for takedowns. But Makwan Amirkhani is just one of these guys where you put money on him and you just watch him wilt, or something happen like in the Lerone Murphy fight where fluky knockout by a knee. But Makwan Amirkhani is just one of these guys who really won't fight for your money. I personally would love to see him win. I think that Makwan Amirkhani is exciting when he's fresh, but I don't think that it's going to happen. I think that the grit of Mike Grundy is going to end up winning him this fight. So give me Mike Grundy this week. I just wanted to touch on Makwan Amirkhani because at 7,700, if he ties up a choke, probably on the winning lineup. At 7,600, Jack Shore should be pretty popular this week. He does have a very tough task ahead of him in Timur Valiev. Big step up in competition, which is always scary. And what also is scary is just a big spot here, fighting in London. While some people think that this is good for the fighters and they like it, I personally do not. I personally think that the situation itself causes a lot of pressure. I think it adds more nervous energy than it does motivate fighters to perform. But that's just me. What do you think? It doesn't matter what you think. I think Jack Shore could win rounds based on the wrestling ability, but he may find it hard to keep Valiev down, and in the past we have seen him rack up a lot of control time, but I don't think he's going to be able to do something like that to Timur Valiev. But even so, I do still prefer this side of the fight. I know it's a bit chalky, but I like Jack Shore, and we are going to be using him when we build some lineups later on because there is value at 7,600, especially with how often he's looking for takedowns and just his stick-to-itiveness to do that. At 7,500, we have another fighter who should be very popular this week. I expect a lot of people to get here to Paul Craig in your contests, and it's for really good reason. We talked about this fight earlier in the week. These guys are not boring fighters. They're not patiently picking their spots and setting things up. Nikita Krylov and Paul Craig are going to be looking for the finish for every second of this fight. For Nikita Krylov, the best chance that he has is knocking out Paul Craig early, but if he doesn't do that right away, he's inevitably going to fall into the clinch at some point. And we've seen Krylov shoot for takedowns as well. Paul Craig will oblige. Paul Craig sometimes even pulls guard intentionally. But Craig is a serious problem on the ground. We've seen him find submissions and threaten subs to pull off reversals. And Krylov is one of these guys who will tend to make crucial mistakes the longer the fight goes. So when you consider how opportunistic Paul Craig is and couple that with 1 to 2 low fight IQ moments that you could expect from Krylov, well then you have a submission finish at 7,500. And the Paul Craig submission prop is just crazy to me. It's plus 450. I definitely put some money on that. Quickly, I have Elise Reed here at 7,400. I do think this is a winnable fight for her, and if the favorites end up dominating this week and she gets a win, then she might be DraftKings viable. But I do worry about her ceiling. We have 12 fights here to work with, and I think we're probably going to see 5 to 7 finishes. So I'm not dying to play Elise Reed this week. She seems like she might be a better straight bet than a DraftKings play, but the same logic applies here as the other women's fight. Home team, high output, mixing it up, stealing close rounds, so a straight bet as a dog could be okay with Elise Reed, but just like Luana Carolina, proceed with caution. Shamil Abdurakhimov, I'm really not that interested. I think Pavlovich is going to knock him out. Cody Durden is a junkyard dog, and he's a tough out for really anybody making their UFC debut, and I don't think he wins this fight, but I do think that he's probably better than somebody like Abdurakhimov, better than Elise Reed, and I can see him having success in spots in this fight, which keeps me off of Mokaev because I do think that it's going to be a really competitive fight, and I think it's going to be a real test for Muhammad Mokaev making his UFC debut. And now at this range here, the 7,000, 6,900, 6,800, one of these guys is going to end up winning. I honestly feel the worst about Jai Herbert just because physically I think that he's really going to struggle to keep Topuria off of him, and once they're on the ground, that height and reach advantage won't mean anything. So I really don't like Jai Herbert there. Kazula Vargas ranks as my number 2 in this range because Paddy the Baddie is not defensively sound. He is a bit of a product of hype. I like him. I hope that he wins. I've got the Paddy NFT. I do expect a lot of people to put Paddy in their lineups. I personally will not because I do think that Kazula Vargas is somebody that could spoil the party, but I'm personally not going to get here. My favorite fighter in this range by far is Takashi Sato at 7,000. If Takashi Sato wins this fight, it's probably a first or second round knockout. That's what Takashi Sato's career has been. He's got stinging power and it's mostly coming from a straight left hand, and I know that sounds super simple, but let me tell you you this straight left hand is beautiful. There's no telegraphing it at all. It looks very natural, smooth, it's sneaky fast, and it's putting dudes down. As for Gunnar Nelson, he's historically slow on the feet. He eats more shots than he lands. He hasn't had a fight in years, and he's a submission or bust guy. I say he's a submission or bust guy, just look at his record. Decision he loses, KO he loses. These 2 submissions he wins. If we scroll down further, submission he wins, decision he loses, submission he wins. Now, it's very possible that Gunnar Nelson is going to be able to take advantage of really poor grappling and poor submission defense from Takashi Sato, but Sato is coming out of a good gym, so the game plan might be solid despite the short notice call. And he really doesn't have to worry about Nelson's power. So to me, if Sato doesn't need to respect the power coming back his way, if Gunnar Nelson is standing there to be hit, I could see that straight left hand putting him down early, and at 7,000, he'll absolutely need to be in your lineup. And for the prop, Takashi Sato by KO, it's plus 700. That's crazy. And what's even crazier is that Gunnar Nelson is a minus 500 favorite right now. I can't think of anybody that he hasn't fought already that he should be this big of a favorite over in the UFC. That is absurd to me. I think a lot of casual money is coming in on Gunnar Nelson. I think he's going to burn a lot of people. I think Takashi Sato gets it done by knockout. And honestly, a lot of people will look at the price here of Gunnar Nelson at 9,200 and subconsciously think, oh, well, there's no way that he loses. He's not going to lose. And I'll tell you right now, as I'm building lineups, and this kind of brings us to our next point, salary matters very, very little this week. I've found myself building lineups where I'm keeping over 1,000 salary on the table, and I feel good about it because I'm looking to capture as much finishing upside as possible. And for a lot of these fights, I see them going the distance. Like I said, I think we're going to have anywhere between maybe 5 to 7 finishes on this card. But those 5 to 7 finishes might not come from the people that you think, and they might not come from that traditional lineup building structure where you leave $100, $200, $300 on the table. So I think one thing that you need to do to be successful this week is to try your best to target upside and don't focus so much on the salary. Literally build your lineups and then see how much salary is either left or how much you owe after you make them. Okay, now we're going to build some lineups, and I'm going to start with what you're going to see probably in a lot of your tournaments. So in a lot of our contests, we're probably going to see something just like this. I think a decent amount of people are going to be on Paddy. I think most people think that Tom Aspinall will be winning the main event. Sergei Pavlovich is basically a lock because of his win condition. And then Jack Shore and Paul Craig are the more popular dog plays of the week. Now, I left one spot open for the co-main event because I do expect it to be pretty split. I think the ownership between Dan Hooker and Arnold Allen is going to be pretty close. So if you're somebody who played Dan Hooker and thought, well, I don't want to spend all the salary, and you come over here to Arnold Allen, you left 200 salary on the table, this, my friend, is the chalk. Well, how do we get different? Well, first, I think that you should probably go the other way in the main event. Now you've left 600 on the table and you're already getting way different. And if you wanted to go the other way and end up taking Dan Hooker instead, you still have 400 left on the table, which I think is a good amount to leave this week. But let's for a second look at the lineup and try to work backward from here and try to figure out if this is the best way for us to attack it. Well, let's take out Volkov for a second and put Tom Aspinall back in here. I mean, those two really don't matter for the exercise that we're about to do, but we'll do this just to take a look. Paddy Pimblett. So the likelihood of him scoring the same amount of points that he scored last time out, I mean, it's pretty low. And the only reason I say that it's low is because that's a lot of points. But it's not impossible because Kazula Vargas can't grapple, and Paddy is probably going to look to get this fight to the mat as soon as possible. Unless, of course, he might have fallen in love with his hands because of the knockout that he got last time, but I think that Paddy is going to get him down and work his submission game, and he probably does end up finding a submission probably in the second or third round. So there's finishing upside, that's good. Tom Aspinall, you're hoping for a first or second round knockout, that's finishing upside, that's very good. Sergei Pavlovich, all of us are hoping for a first round knockout. He's got an 8-inch reach advantage, he throws heat, he's fighting Shamil Abdurakhimov, who's over 40 years old and looked terrible against Chris Daukaus when he did start eating punches. So give me Sergei Pavlovich. I think they're feeding him Abdurakhimov in this spot. So now you've captured 3 fighters with real high finishing upside. Well, you can say the same thing for Paul Craig. He's never won or lost a decision, so if he wins, it's inside the distance and he's going to score you a good amount of points. Now, Jack Shore, I don't think that he really belongs here, because while I do expect him to win, I think it's going to be a very close fight. I think both fighters are going to have success, and if Timur Valiev is shooting for takedowns as well, then that's going to limit the upside that Jack Shore has, because he's going to spend crucial time fighting off takedowns instead of looking for a finish of his own. So I really don't care for Jack Shore in this lineup. Dan Hooker, I think, makes a lot of sense because when you look at who was left who we could afford, there's not a whole lot of finishing upside, and we know that Dan Hooker pushes a crazy pace and could score a good amount of points even in a 3-round fight. The only remaining fighter that I see left on the board with finishing upside who I trust looks like Takashi Sato. Because if Takashi Sato wins, then it's very, very likely to be a first-round knockout. So when you look at this lineup, you have Paddy, who has good matchup, grappling advantage, takedown upside, as well as finishing upside. We have Aspinall, Pavlovich, and Sato, who all share pretty much the same win condition, a first-round knockout. Paul Craig likely to get it done inside the distance if he does win, and Dan Hooker, who can end up scoring you 90 to 95 points in a decision win, or he can go out there and finish Arnold Allen. Now, if you wanted to come up from Pavlovich and grab somebody like Topuria for a better matchup, that makes a lot of sense too. And I think playing Paddy and Topuria in the same lineup makes you get different, considering that they're the two most expensive fighters on the slate. Now, personally, if I wanted to go away from Tom Aspinall and grab somebody like Alexander Volkov, I'm leaving 700 on the table. I think I'll take out Paddy, put somebody like Pavlovich in there just to get different. And now I've left 1100 on the table. And for most of you, that probably looks crazy. And to me, this looks like a lineup that is extremely different. It captures a lot of different upside potentials. And here's the biggest thing that stood out to me about making this kind of lineup specifically when I was doing it earlier in the week. If we take out Dan Hooker and we look at who's left, well, obviously we wouldn't play Gunnar Nelson in this lineup when we have Takashi Sato. Muhammad Mokaev, I think that his upside is limited because of Cody Durden's wrestling. I think Cody Durden's going to make it a dogfight. So while I expect Mokaev to make good on his UFC debut, I don't expect him to score as many points as somebody like Dan Hooker. But before I was looking at Nathaniel Wood, but now he's off of the card, he was somebody that could have competed with Dan Hooker's ceiling at this price. Cory McKenna, I think same thing, limited ceiling. I don't think that she scores as many points as Dan Hooker would score. Nikita Krylov doesn't make sense in this lineup because he's fighting Paul Craig. Timur Valiev, I don't expect him to win, but if he does, probably doesn't score that many points because Jack Shore's going to be looking for takedowns as well. So I think that fight itself is going to score lower than a lot of people will hope, and I think both sides of that from a DraftKings perspective are probably going to end up burning people because it's going to be a competitive grappling match one way or the other. Mike Grundy is not a bad play because if he does get these takedowns, he's going to score you a decent amount of points. So he's a fighter that can compete with the scoring ceiling of Dan Hooker in a 3-round fight. So you can keep your eye on Mike Grundy. If you put him into this lineup, you still have 800 left over. That's not too bad. And if you really aren't sold on the Takashi Sato pick, I understand. You can come back up here and you can grab somebody probably like Jack Shore. But again, the problem with grabbing Jack Shore is just that limited ceiling, and now you've only left 200 on the table. So if you're playing something big, playing something large field, you're probably not getting as different as you need to be. And I'll quickly put together here what I think a decent cash game lineup would be. Now, if you're playing cash games, you could go with something like this. And the reason why I think this would make sense for your cash games is just because you're not playing the main event, which I think is going to be extremely volatile. I think more people are going to play Tom Aspinall than Alexander Volkov, and I think the Aspinall people are going to get burned. But you can't rule out the possibility of him scoring the knockout, and that's not something that I want to gamble on when I'm playing my cash game lineups. So instead, I'll go home team for both women's MMA fights because, again, they both change levels, throw a lot of strikes, high output, and I expect them to score a decent amount if they do win. And when I say decent amount, I mean decent amount for your cash games. It might not be 105 points that you would need in your tournament lineups, but for cash games, I think it's more than viable if you get away with scoring 75, 80 points in a decision, as long as you're getting the winners. And then you have Pavlovich, again, good matchup. He's probably getting the knockout win here. And then you need to finish the lineup with some underdogs, and I think if you're looking for grappling upside, these are the ones that are going to give you the best chance. These are the ones that might even score well in losses, considering how Paul Craig's probably going to be able to pull off some sweeps, and Jack Shore is going to be looking for takedowns of his own. Now, I'm pulling up Tapology so that I can give you guys the final picks for the entire card, but one thing I wanted to talk about while I do this is Captain Mode. So I've never talked to you guys about Captain Mode before, but recently somebody who watches the channel, somebody who I talk to, he brought up something that was really interesting to me. It was actually Jimmy, shout out to Jim Jam, aka Jimmy Lowe. He talked about how in Captain Mode you can basically look at what's happening in Classic and trying to determine ownership from there. So I think that's really smart. If you guys are playing Captain Mode, then try to look at some of your classic lineups or your classic contests to try to determine where ownership's going to be in your captain mode games. And what you can do is target underdogs with high finishing upside who maybe aren't coming in at the highest ownership in your classic games, put them in your captain spot, and then fill the rest out with safe, chalky picks. It's a solid strategy. Now, as far as the card goes, fight for fight, I'm going to go Alexander Volkov, Dan Hooker, Paddy the Batty, Takashi Sato as our first real big underdog. I've got Molly McCann, Ilya Topuria, Mike Grundy, Sergei Pavlovich, Paul Craig, Jack Shore. Tentatively, I think Jack Shore ends up pulling off the win here, at least gets the decision in the close rounds because home team. Cory McKenna, and then I'm going to go with Muhammad Mokaev. If you've gotten to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, that way I could bring more of this to you. And again, watch out for this start time this week. It's at 4 p.m. as well, and that's why this video is coming out a bit earlier.